Well, welcome to our Bible study. It's good to be here with you to learn a little bit about Jesus. We're Christians, we should know about Jesus, and today we're going to continue the study of Mark and do Mark 1, verse 16 to 28. Today, Jesus is going to pick his first 4 disciples and he's going to cast out a demon. He's going to get into ministry. But first, I want to ask you a question. What do you think that it means to follow Jesus? You say, well, let's see. If I'm going to follow Jesus, I have to believe in him. Yep, you got to believe in him. And you're thinking, I need to learn about it. Yep, you need to learn about it. For instance, going to Bible studies is following Jesus. And I need to be obedient and do what he says. Yeah, you got to be obedient and do what he says. And he's got a job for you to do. And to follow Jesus is to do those things and to do the job that Jesus has for you to do. Well, let me ask you another question. Do you believe in the spiritual world? You say, well, yeah, I think I believe in the spiritual world. Well, I'm going to tell you, Jesus clearly believed in the spiritual world. And today, Jesus is going to cast out a demon, and we will get to that. So here's our background for today. Jesus is ready to start his public ministry. He has been baptized by John the Baptist. Remember what happened? When John the Baptist baptized Jesus, Jesus came up and the Spirit descended on him like a dove. And there was a visible, audible voice, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." And then immediately after that, Jesus went out and spent 40 days in the wilderness. And he was fasting and praying and being tempted by Satan. And now after all that, he is ready to start his public ministry. And Jesus has gone from down in the southern province of Judea up to the northern province of Galilee. And that's where we're going to start. We're going to start the study today. He's going to be in Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee. Well, I just thought, we had to get in a map to put these things in perspective. Think about 3 provinces. They're smaller than U.S. states, maybe about a quarter the size, but 3 provinces with Judea in the south, Samaria up north of that, and the north of that is Galilee. Well, down in Judea is the center of Judaism. Jerusalem is there. The temple's there. In fact, Jesus was born where? He was born in Bethlehem, and that is also down there. Now, if you go up to Galilee, there's some important places in Galilee too. There's Jesus' boyhood home, Nazareth. Maybe you can see Nazareth there. There is Cana, where he did his first miracle, turning the water into wine. And then over to the northeast of Galilee is the Sea of Galilee, and you can see that city, Capernaum. And Capernaum is the center of Jesus' ministry when he is up in Galilee. So Jesus went from down south where he was baptized in the Jordan River, came across up into Galilee and went to Capernaum. And that's where we're going to pick up the story. Mark 1:16. And he was going along by the Sea of Galilee. He saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net in the sea, for they were fishermen. Now, Simon and Andrew, they had met Jesus before. They met Jesus when Jesus and they were down in the southern province of Judea, and they met him and they talked to him. Simon, well, what's Jesus going to do with Simon? Jesus is going to change Simon's name to Peter. And throughout this gospel, sometimes he's referred to as Simon, sometimes as Peter, and sometimes as Simon Peter. But what we're going to do, I'm going to try to be consistent and always refer to this guy as Peter. Well, who was Peter? Peter became a very, very important man. He became the leader of all the 12 disciples. Furthermore, Peter became the leader of the early church after Jesus rose from the dead and ascended into heaven. Peter was the leader of Jesus' church. Very important man. The Gospel of Mark is a record of Peter's teaching. Mark was Peter's disciple, And Mark went with Peter, and Mark wrote down the things that Peter said about Jesus. So really, the Gospel of Peter can almost be called the Gospel. The Gospel of Mark can almost be called the Gospel of Peter. And Peter also wrote 1st and 2nd Peter. So he essentially wrote 3 books of the Bible. He's a very, very important man. He was a great leader in the old church. Now, Andrew, who was Andrew? Andrew was Peter's brother. But Andrew was a disciple of John the Baptist. And John the Baptist told Andrew, he said, you see that guy over there? That guy Jesus? He is the Messiah. And Andrew went and got his brother Peter and said, Peter, I have found the Messiah. Come and see. So this is the way it works even today. One person hears about Jesus and he becomes a Christian. That person tells somebody else, and that person tells somebody else, and so forth. And that's the way it worked. John the Baptist told Andrew about Jesus, and Andrew told Peter about Jesus, and Peter would believe, and he became the leader of the early church, and he became a very, very important and influential man, even in our lives today. Mark 1:17. And Jesus said to them, to Peter and Andrew, follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men. Jesus says what? He says, follow me. Now, this is a really important nuance. Our job as Christians is to follow Jesus. Sometimes we think, Jesus is, he's my friend. I can ask him for anything I want. He'll bless my plans and so forth. No, it's not for us to lead Jesus. It's for us to follow Jesus. Jesus told them to follow me. And our job as Christians is to follow Jesus. As a Christian following Jesus, he has an important work for you to do. What was the work he had for Peter? We had Peter to be the leader of his church and the head disciple, and Peter spent a lot of time learning about Jesus when he walked with him for those 3 years. But Jesus has important work for you to do as well, even if you're in a nursing home. Jesus has important stuff for you to do for him. And everybody's got a different job. And you ask him. You ask Jesus, what can I do for you, Jesus? He'll tell you. Now, what do you think it means when Jesus says, I will make you fishers of men? A, you will help people get to heaven. Yeah, that's one of the things that Peter's done. I wonder how many people ultimately got to heaven because of all that Peter did. Maybe even you and me we're a direct result of Peter's ministry because he was the head of that early church. So as fishers of men, they help people get to heaven. As fishers of men, maybe Jesus was meaning, you're going to help me grow my church. And he did. And you will tell people who I am. And Peter and the others did. And your job will be to go and make disciples. One of the last things he told his disciples before he left, he said, I want you to go and make disciples of all the nations. And that is all part of becoming fishers of men. So, who makes all this happen? Who do you think makes all this happen? It starts with a J. Jesus. Jesus makes it all happen, you see. He says, follow me and Jesus will make you become fishers of men. Mark 1:18. Immediately they left their nets and followed Jesus. You see, Peter and Andrew, they stopped what they were doing and they followed Jesus immediately. You see, I think it's important to make a note here. Jesus is more important than work. He's more important than anything. More important than anything. All right. So when does Jesus want us to follow him? When do you think? It starts with an I. He wants you to follow him immediately. And what is more important than following Jesus? That begins with an N. Nothing is more important than following Jesus. Mark 1:19. Going on a little further, he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, who were also in the boat mending their nets. You see, James and John, they were fishing partners with Peter and Andrew. They both had boats, and they would often work together. They would go out on the lake together, work the nets together. They were business partners. John and James were business partners of Peter and Andrew. Now this guy, John, was also a very, very famous guy. John was a disciple of John the Baptist. There were two people. Andrew was a disciple of John the Baptist. John was also a disciple of John the Baptist. John wrote the Gospel of John. John wrote the Revelation, and he also wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Very important guy, leader in the early church. But right now, he's just a fisherman that's starting to follow Jesus. Immediately, Jesus called to them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired servants and went away to follow him. See, John and James stopped what they were doing, and they followed Jesus. Now, I want you to notice, they didn't leave their father in the lurch, because the father had the servants, had the hired men who were also helping him. So they had enough people to do the job. But John and James left to follow Jesus. Now, at this point, Jesus has 4 disciples. He's got Peter and Andrew and John and James. I want you to note, of these 4, the 3, Peter and John and James, were very special to Jesus. Of the 12, they were the leaders of the 12. Now, Peter was the leader of all of them, but Peter and John and James were the leader of the 12, and they got to see things other people didn't see. Peter and John and James got to go to be with Jesus when he raised the little girl from the dead. They got to be with Jesus when he went up to the mountain and was transfigured. They got to be with Jesus when he was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. He had told the other ones, wait, but Peter and John and James, you come here and pray with me. So they had a special relationship with Jesus. And I want you to note, who were they? These guys were fishermen. They didn't go to rabbi school. They weren't great theologians. They were working class people, maybe like you and I. But nevertheless, Jesus he picked them to do really, really, really important stuff for him. These fishermen, these common people, went on to become faithful disciples of Jesus. They went on to become great leaders in the early church. These were the people that spread Christianity to the ends of the known world. All the way up into Rome, down into Africa, within not a lot of years after Jesus rose from the dead. And they together wrote 8 books of the Bible. That's more than 10% of the Bible. They wrote, these 3 men, these common fishermen, Jesus used to do extraordinary things. And you know what? Jesus will use you to do extraordinary things. Jesus wants you to be great. You need to ask Jesus, say, Jesus, what can I do for you? Please, Jesus, tell me what I can do for you, and then do it. And you can be great. You can be extraordinary in Jesus. Mark 1:21. They went into Capernaum. So they're right on the beach outside of Capernaum. They went into Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and began to preach. I got to give you some background. Each town, if you had 10 Jews in that town, had to have a synagogue. And Capernaum had lots of Jews, so they at least had one synagogue. Maybe they had several synagogues. I don't know. But the synagogue was a place of teaching and of study of scriptures. You know, a lot of people think, well, synagogue is like a church today. No, you didn't go to a synagogue to worship. Now, you might bring some alms for the poor that they would distribute, but you went to a synagogue to learn. You learned about the law, learn about the prophets. That was what the synagogues were all about. They were teaching institutions. And any competent Jew, if you're a Jew and you were competent, you could speak at the synagogue. And that's why Jesus went to the synagogue. He took full advantage of this. He would go from synagogue to synagogue preaching the gospel. You know who else did that? Well, Paul did that. Paul, the first thing he would do, he'd enter a town, he'd go to the synagogue, and it's because he'd have an opportunity to speak. And they could talk. Theology is what they would talk about, but they would talk about Jesus, talk about the law of the prophets, and Paul would talk about Jesus, and Jesus would talk about the gospel. 1:22. They were amazed. The people in the synagogue were amazed at his teaching, at Jesus' teaching. For he was teaching them as one having authority and not as the scribes. So who were the scribes? Well, the scribes were very, very, very well educated people. The scribes studied and debated the scriptures. They studied and debated the tradition of the elders, the oral tradition of what you could do and what you couldn't do. And they were the ones who formulated the rules for everyday life there. The oral tradition came out of the scribes. They taught the scriptures and they taught the rules. And where did they teach them? They taught them in the synagogue. Now, it's really interesting. Oh, they also judged cases because they were knowledgeable. They were the most knowledgeable people about sometimes they call them lawyers. And they would judge cases because they were the most knowledgeable people about the law and the prophets and what you could do and what you couldn't do and what the rules were. But it was very interesting. When these guys taught or they proclaimed in their judgments, they would always cite someone. They never cited themselves. They would always say, just as the great teacher Saul, great teacher Gamaliel, or whoever has said. So they would always cite other people. They wouldn't put forth their own views, or they would always say that I agree and I'm teaching what this other great teacher taught. It's a very different way to teach than what we teach today. Why do you think that they were amazed that Jesus teaching? Remember who Jesus is. He's God, right? Of course he's going to have some pretty good teaching. Well, his content and methods were superior to the scribes. Well, of course they were. This is Jesus. Jesus spoke with the authority of the Father. Furthermore, he spoke with his own authority. And he did not cite the teachings of others. Never hear Jesus citing the teaching of others like the scribes were. He was so vastly superior, so he taught them very differently than the scribes do. So when he went in, they were amazed at the way that Jesus taught. And he didn't teach like the scribes. He didn't cite other scholars. He cited his own authority and the Father's authority. All right, Mark 1:23 to 24. Just then there was a man in their synagogue with an unclean spirit. And he cried out, saying, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." So there was a demon. And you can imagine this demon. "I know you are, Jesus. You're the Holy One of God. Have you come to destroy us?" Well, here's some note. This man was possessed by a demon. And the demon knew. What did the demon know? Well, he knew that Jesus is the Messiah, called him the Holy One of God. The demon knew. He knew that Jesus had power and authority over him. Mark 1:25 to 26. And Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be quiet and come out of him." Throwing him into convulsions, the unclean spirit cried out with a loud voice and came out of him. A couple of things I want you to note here. First of all, what did Jesus show? Jesus showed his absolute authority and power over the demons. Absolute authority and power over the demons. I want you to note that the demon had to obey Jesus' command. Demons don't necessarily have to. Well, so that's why when you deal with demons, you always deal in Jesus' name, because they're very powerful beings. And one reason that I believe in Jesus is that he had power and authority over Satan and his dominions. It's one reason I believe. He just has to tell the demons to get out, and they have to leave. I want you to also notice, what did that demon do before he left? He threw the guy into convulsions. Just don't ever think that this demons and Satan have your good in mind. They're evil, and they have your worst in mind. They want to hurt you. And what does he do? He takes one final parting shot before he leaves the guy, throws him into convulsions. Mark 1:27. They were all amazed. So they debated among themselves, "Who is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." So why do you think they were so amazed? Wow. They were amazed because Jesus taught with authority, not based on the teaching of others. He taught with complete authority, his own authority, and the authority of the Father. They were amazed because Jesus demonstrated his power and authority over the demons. And they were amazed because who did the demon claim that Jesus was? The demon says, that guy is the Messiah. They were amazed. Mark 1:28, last verse for today. Immediately Immediately, the news about him spread every way into all the surrounding districts of Galilee. So why was news spreading all around about Jesus? Why do you think? Well, because Jesus taught with authority. This guy, you got to come and listen to this guy teach. He teaches with authority. He teaches with the authority of himself and the authority of the Father. You got to come and see this guy. You got to come and see him. Jesus showed power over authority and demons. Didn't even do any rituals. He just says, demon, get out of him. And the demon had to leave. And they're all asking, could this guy Jesus really be the Messiah? Is this guy the Messiah that the demon said that he was? Could this guy be the Messiah? And word about Jesus and things about Jesus spread like wildfire all throughout Galilee, and crowds started following Jesus. Everybody wanted to be around. They wanted to be around Jesus. They wanted to hear his teaching because he taught with authority. They wanted to see him within his power over spiritual matters. And also, it doesn't talk about it here, but they wanted to see him do miracles. Crowds following Jesus. Well, here's my summary. Jesus chose his first disciples, Peter and John, James and Andrew. Jesus chose his first disciples. Second thing I want you to know and remember is Jesus taught with inherent authority. Jesus taught with authority. And finally, what I want you to get out of this is Jesus has complete authority and power over demons in the spiritual world. You think Jesus believed in the spiritual world? Yeah, Jesus believed in the spiritual world. Well, if you've been watching, I'm asking every one of you to pray 3 prayers every day. Add them to your prayer. You pray every day? Do you pray every day? One of the most incredible gifts we have as Christians is to be able to go right into the throne room, crawl up on the Father's lap and call him Daddy. Tell him how we did today. And you got to be praying every day. You got to be praying every day. And here's 3 prayers I want you to add to your prayers. First of all, I want you to pray for salvation to those around. It's a great evangelical prayer. If you're in a facility, pray for the aides and the staff and the kitchen people, everybody around you, beside your family. And pray for your family too. Pray for salvation for them. Pray against racism. Racism is an evil thing. There's no place for racism in Jesus' church. There's no place for racism in our great country. And pray for unity. Pray for unity in Jesus' church. Pray for unity in our great country. Well, with all that said, thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Aloha, see you there. And if you're getting something out of these videos, please pass them on to somebody who you also think would get something out of them. God bless you.